Hello, hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy fall. It is 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And what that means is that it's time for Intentional Conversations VodCast. And I want to welcome each of you. Thanks so much for being here today. We've been expecting you. As we just take a moment to admit all of our vodcasts, participants and guests into the live virtual space, we invite you to take to chat. Let us know where you're joining the conversation from. It's always interesting to us to see where people are joining us from. And please also share in the chat any information that you want us to know about you. Sometimes our attendees will share their LinkedIn information. And what that means is that you desire for this community to connect with you beyond this window of time. And we always appreciate that. I'm Dr. Nika White, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I look forward to hosting this community of learners as we learn with and from each other. As per usual, we always like to say that we encourage cameras. We love to see smiling faces. But if you're just joining us in more of an auditory capacity just to observe, we welcome you also nonetheless. And we're so glad that you decided to spend this hour with us. If you have a need for closed caption, we have enabled that. It's our way of really showing forth disability inclusion. So we want to acknowledge that right now. I also want to encourage you that throughout our time together today, I want you to use the chat. It is a way to help extend community as we learn with and from each other. If I say something or our guest co-host today says something that resonates with you, then take to the chat with your thoughts, your sentiments. If a resource comes to mind and you believe it would be of value to this entire podcast community, we encourage you to share that resource in the chat. We love resources and we'll be doing the same. And so once again, this is Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership in business. We're so glad you're here. Welcome again. Again, for those who are just joining, this is Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership in business. We are live today on LinkedIn, so I want to acknowledge the LinkedIn audience, as well as all of those who have gathered here into our virtual space for this live VodCast experience. And so again, I am Dr. Nika White, and I am so glad that you all are here. One of the things I continue to express and to share is that if you are joining us, it's because you have either joined us in the past and you found value in our content and you like being here live, but we do know that there are some individuals who love to get their content via podcast. And so we do take the audio from our podcast experience and we make it available wherever you like to get your podcast. And so keep that in mind and share it out with others in your network. One of the things that we love to do on our Intentional Conversations VodCast is educate. We love to make sure we're bringing to the conversation national observances so that we all are aware and we can govern ourselves accordingly by the way in which we show support to certain communities that are in need. So we are honoring Indigenous Peoples Day, which is October 10th. I want you to have that top of mind and make sure that you share it out with others in your network as well. This is also the month of breast cancer awareness. And so I'm going to tell you, ladies, test your tatas, make sure that you're okay, that you're safe, that you're getting the proper screenings and trainings that you need. There's nothing at all wrong with it. In fact, it is saving lives. And so we need to talk about it more and not make it so taboo, okay? Okay, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Wear pink to actually help people to recognize the need for continued awareness around breast cancer. And on October 14th, I always like to make sure you know what to look forward to in terms of new guest co-hosts. And I'm super excited because Dr. Tanya M. Session is going to be joining us as our guest co-host. We're going to be discussing all things DEIB, specifically organizational development and women in the workplace. If you do not know Dr. Session, I encourage you to follow her, get to know her, and most importantly, to join us on October 14th for that podcast. And then the week following, on the 21st of October, we'll have Lisa M. Ung, and we're going to be discussing Asian Americans in the workplace, how to grow your AAPI talent bench, and how to address the model minority myth. I look forward to that topic as well. It's not one that we've spent a lot of time on in this podcast, which is why we had such great energy around inviting Lisa on. And so I hope that you will join us on October the 21st. And then finally, I also want to make sure that you know that October 28th, we'll be bringing back Jen Tardy. Jen is a great practitioner in this space. She does a lot of work around diversity recruitment. And so we're going to be talking about the EQ and lived experience. She's actually created this model that she has coined LEQ, which is about lived experience intelligence. So I cannot wait to delve into that conversation. And I hope that you will mark your calendars accordingly and join us on October the 28th. As always, this is just a reminder that many of our guest co-hosts, they come to us by way of recommendations from you. So if you know of someone that you think would make for a great co-host for our podcast, we want to hear, we want to connect with them. You can share those recommendations with us. We're now booking for Q1 of 2023. We're all booked out this year and have been for quite some time, but we do want to hear from you regarding guest co-host potentials for Q1 of 2023. You can send those recommendations to my colleague, Amora Carter, simply at amora@nikawhite.com. Now, you all are familiar, especially if you've been joining us for quite some time, that before we bring on our guest co-hosts, we like to take a moment to provide a formal bio and introduction of that person. And so today will be no different. We are welcoming Lisette Martinez, and I am going to read her official bio. I want you to know her accolades, her credentials, how in which she shows up to this space, and then we'll be given an opportunity to directly hear from Lisette as she greets each of us in her own way. Lisette Martinez is the Executive Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for Jefferson Health and Thomas Jefferson University. She leads Jefferson's integration of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and practices to ensure excellence in education, research, and patient care. From developing results-oriented strategies and designing effective diversity and inclusion education programs to building strong relationships with community organizations, government agencies, and departments within Jefferson, Lisette works to ensure that all parts of Jefferson reflect the diverse cultures it serves. Previously, Lisette served as Yale New Haven Health System's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, where she was responsible for the success and continued growth of the system's diversity and inclusion efforts, guiding analysis, development, and implementation of strategies to advance diversity and inclusion throughout the entire system. Before joining Yale New Haven, Lisette Martinez was the System Director of Diversity and Language Services at TriHealth. Her responsibilities including leading a multidimensional D&I strategy, enhancing the inclusion efforts of the workforce, and advocating actions to help achieve advantages of a diverse workforce. She facilitated the implementation of diversity change management initiatives and worked to provide linguistic services for patients who have limited English proficiency or are deaf or hard of hearing. In 2020, Lisette was recognized as one of the top 100 women of influence by Diversity MBA Media. She is also the recipient of the 2016 Top 100 Under 50 Executive Leaders Award by Diversity MBA Magazine, and was also a 40 Under 40 awardee in 2012. And to add to that, was one of the first women in Cincinnati to receive the Women of Influence Award by Lead Magazine in 2013. In 2014, Lisette was awarded the Multicultural Leadership Award by the Ohio Diversity Council. She has also been honored by Major League Baseball with the Seat 21 Award that recognizes individuals who embody the humanitarian spirit of Roberto Clemente. She is a proud member of the Urban Leaders Class 21 and is a graduate of Leadership Cincinnati Class 38. She also graduated with Delta Epsilon Sigma honors from Thomas More University with an MBA in May of 2006 and received her BBA from the University of Cincinnati in August of 1996. And she has one daughter, Giselle Sophia, what a beautiful name, who is a senior at the University of Cincinnati. And this is not in her bio, but I'm also proud to say that she is my sister. She is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And so we share that in common as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because I want to add Lisette Martinez to our spotlight today. And Lisette, welcome. Thank you for saying yes to our invite. So look forward to getting you into this conversation. And I prepped you because I wanted you to know that while we read all of your accolades, and yes, sometimes our guest co-hosts will say, please don't read all of that. And I'm like, no, I'm reading it all. I'm reading it all. We're standing in our worth and in our knowledge, and you deserve every bit of that time that was spent in sharing your accolades and credentials. But now what I would love for you to do is greet the audience in your own way, and specifically maybe share with us a couple fun facts or tidbits about you that we would not know from reading your bio. And we just love to hear from you as we jumpstart this, what I know is going to be an amazing conversation. So welcome, Lisette.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for including me in your podcast. This is an amazing opportunity to kind of share some of the work that I am doing, but I just want to really express the gratitude of all the work that you do in the DEI space and how you open up the dialogue, and you really are truly a change agent. And thank you so very much to you and your entire team. They've been phenomenal in working with me in developing this material for today. So thank you all. So, it is kind of like when you hear your bio, you get kind of shy and back away from things. And, we have to get better at that. So thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing some of the things that I've done in my work experience. But some of the fun things are some things that people may not know about me. We talk a lot about the work that I've done in healthcare in the DEI space. But actually, what a lot of people don't know is I actually started my career as a buyer. I was a buyer in the retail space for several years. I worked for companies like Toys R Us. I worked for Luxottica Retail. I worked for Chiquita Brands and Macy's in supplier diversity, which was what we're going to talk about today. But I will say I wanted to share a story. I was talking to Dr. White about this. A lot of times people go through epiphanies in life and reflect upon things that, get them to make different decisions. And for me, although I, started my career as a buyer, I made a huge decision to pivot my career into diversity and inclusion. And I'd just love to share the story as to why I did that. So, when I first started, I was working at Luxottica Retail. And for those who don't know what Luxottica is, it's eyeglasses. They do lens crafters. You may have heard of Ilori sunglasses, Pearl Vision. I was a buyer for Sunglass Hut, which is under Luxottica Retail. And at the time, you get lots of these notices of new jobs opening up. And there was a job that I saw that kind of sparked my attention. Luxottica is an Italian company, but they wanted to start a diversity and inclusion department that, was new to them. And they were bringing in a consultant, and they were looking for people interested in being the first manager to kind of run this department. And I thought to myself, what is this? And I started reading, and it led me back to a story when I was 12 years old. And so I'll give you a little background. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. My family is Puerto Rican background, but I grew up in the 70s in a very Black and white community. So I never really saw myself, not a lot of Hispanics in Detroit at that time. And going to school, I never saw myself anywhere. And I remember in the 6th grade, we were at a camping trip at a camp called Camp Tamarack. And I was coming out of the lunch line going into the canteen, which is the lunchroom. And I noticed that my Black friends were on one side of the room and my white friends were on the other. Now I'm 12 years old and I'm like, shook. And I'm like, okay, where do I sit? And I'm just standing there in awe. Like, it's the first time I'd ever seen this type of segregated, because in school, you sit with your class. You didn't sit, everyone sits with their class, mate. This time we got to choose where we sat. And it was an organic experience where you see the segregation happen, and you see it still today. So as I'm standing there, the counselor's like, Lisa, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know where to sit. And she goes, you can sit anywhere. And I said, my Black friend's on one side and my white friend's on the other. Where do I sit? She didn't even question it. She turned around and she made everybody move. And that feeling that I had at 12 years old was just such an amazing feeling, where I felt like, oh, I'm part of something, but I didn't know really what it meant. Right. But when I was working at Luxottica and I saw that position come by my desk, diversity and inclusion, the word inclusion just resonated. And I said, that's what I felt when I was 12. And
Mhm.
I made a decision. I said, I want this job. You know, I had to take a step back. I had to pivot my career and really work hard to work with diversity folks within Cincinnati. But I made the choice to take the step back to really provide the opportunity for employees to feel included in organizations. And that's really my mission.
It's such a great story, Lisette. I love so much about it, particularly that you were 12 and you had influence, right? Influence that stayed with you. It also influenced others and influenced your future path. And sometimes that's all it takes. You know, we don't have to have some big epiphany. It literally can be just one experience that allows us to open up our mindset around the value of inclusion. And so I love that story. I also appreciate how your start was in procurement, was in buying, purchasing,
Mhm.
and supplier diversity, which again is going to be a big topic that we will cover today. And then you broaden that to so many other ways in which you could impact this work of inclusion and equity and belonging. I shared with you before that I am deeply committed to this work of economic inclusion. You know, some of the time that I spend in this space has a lot to do with helping minority businesses grow and thrive and compete effectively in the marketplace. And so this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And I'm so glad that we can amplify it, because I think that under the broad umbrella of DEI, we talk about a lot of important things, and supplier diversity sometimes is not the one that tends to fall to the top of the list. And I
Right.
would like to see more of that. So today is going to be a great conversation. It also reminds me, Lisette, that sometimes when we think about DEI, we will relegate it to like one particular department. And most often it's all about HR. And the human capital, that's a big piece of it, significant piece of it, but it impacts everything, every operation, purchasing, procurement, marketing, everything. And so I love that when we talk about supplier diversity, it gives us another way to amplify the need for the lens of DEI to be infiltrated into every single aspect of an organization. So let's jump right in. Supplier diversity was mandated by an executive order back in 1969 by President Nixon. Why is it just as important now as it was then? And what have you seen in terms of an evolution around supplier diversity from then to now?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So, you know, when you think about where it started, originally the history began within the construction field and getting folks, you know, I think that, you know, back in the 60s, there was a big need, because in the construction space, you have lots of general contractors that were mostly white owned, so there's a monopoly there across the US. And then you have a lot of subcontractors that fill some of these larger contracts to help complete a big project in building. And minority subs were not making the cut into these larger contracts. And you know, when you have you know, you think about systemic racism and how it has led into our country and the history behind that. And when you have majority owned construction companies that have their friends who they've known for many years, they have very tight knit relationships and control of who can be part of projects, then you have the smaller subs and minority and women-owned subs that don't make the cut because of that. There's no connection, there's no networking, there's no filtering in these organizations to help them grow in the community. And so there was a need to address it and to really stem, you know, what does that supplier diversity look like? And it's grown, right? It's not just construction and facilities anymore. It's now
Right.
into what are the goods and services that can really help our organizations grow. And so it's just as important now as it is then. And unfortunately, it's really sad to say that not a lot has really changed. You still see these same norms happen. And in the buying world, that's the nature of the buying world. I was a
Right.
buyer. When you have a contract, whether it's goods, services, construction, construction or contract management, you tend to lean towards those people you know
Of course.
and have confidence and trust and know will do a good job. regardless of how much you're paying. And the buyer kind of sets the tone, even though their number one issue responsibility is to lower costs for our stakeholders, right? But we know, oh my gosh, we know this company, he's a buddy, he's going to do really good. And then we keep giving that person a contract. And it's easy because then you don't have to start another RFP, which is a request for proposal, and start the whole process. It's just easier to continue that. And that becomes common. And so, what we have to begin to look at is, what is that competitive advantage for our organization? What do we need to do as organizations to understand better, to save our organization money, and to really help with the economic inclusion within the footprint in which we hold within our communities?
Yeah. So, again, so much of what you're sharing is really resonating with me. I also want to make sure that for those who are gathered here today, that we know this is not only just a practice that a lot of large corporations need to be mindful of. I also think that sometimes the smaller or mid-sized businesses don't have this in their consideration set because they believe, well, my resources aren't as deep as like a big brand box, organization or corporation, but that's not true. We all have spend needs. Whatever your spend needs are, just be much more intentional to consider ethnic minority owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, businesses that operate into these low, moderate income communities, because that helps build up the local economies as well. But I think that there's a message here, regardless of the size of the organization. So I just wanted to plug that for a quick moment. I love the fact that you amplified this concept of supplier diversity starting within construction, because that is a big area that I know a lot of minority contractors are really challenged. I'll share a quick story, and it happens to be related to a healthcare facility that's in the upstate of South Carolina. But years ago, again, I do a lot of work with minority businesses. There was a minority business owner that was new into construction space and was getting a good bit of traction and work, but then the hospital system was doing a lot of construction, and they were looking for suppliers. And what they realized is that while we're committed to supplier diversity, and we do pretty well with good percentage of our spend with minority suppliers, not in the construction space. And they had to dig deep to ask questions like, why is this? And what they realize is that there are too many barriers and limitations that prevent minority contractors from being in the consideration set. Because even if you are a well-established contractor and you've done that work in different regards, if you haven't done it for a healthcare facility, that's a whole nother world. There's a lot of other considerations you have to have. So they ended up developing this really robust program, mentor protege program, where they brought this minority contractor in. And for a year, they paid the stipend of this individual just to learn under their other contractors, to learn the way, how to do this level of work for this type of entity. And it was a game changer. And I love that because it helps to really underscore the innovative approach that sometimes we have to be able to drive results when we really are trying to support minority contractors. And so I wanted to share that story because lots of bias exists within that process, right?
Yeah, it does. It does. I want to mention something too. You said, these programs to help mentor and to get smaller organizations in is so incredibly important, because you're right. I'm in healthcare, and the subcontractors need to learn and understand how to work within a space where you have patients. And that is very different than being able just to paint in a brand new facility where there's nobody. Right. And so it does take a lot of partnerships to do that. And larger GCs now are recognizing it. I want to recognize Turner Construction. It's a majority owned construction company. However, they have a phenomenal mentoring program and helping smaller construction companies move up into the world and learning that space, especially in healthcare.
Yes, no, absolutely. Turner Construction is a great example. So thank you for shouting them out. So how can supplier diversity become financially and socially beneficial to an organization? Let's talk about those benefits.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic, financially and socially, both. There are two things. We want to help our organizations understand how important it is to work with our local vendors. And I want to share this too. All of us, and Dr. White mentioned it before, whether you're a large company or a small company, should really think about the importance of really investing in your community. what's important is that you understand that if you are a brick and mortar organization, you take up space in that community. And if you are a large company, you're taking up a lot of space. And when you take up that space, you have a responsibility to make sure that your community flourishes, and are responsible for making sure that you engage and that you keep your footprint within your communities also a part of your business, and bringing them along to help them grow. And that's a huge responsibility for organizations, but it's one that is both going to financially help you because you're working with local vendors and thinking about an entire request for a proposal, not a whole lot of distance. So you're right there, right? And then socially, you have a community that now sees how much you are engaged in growing that community and helping that community grow. And that's about economic inclusion. And that's incredibly important on the social aspect. But we have to make intentional decisions to make that happen, and having folks really spotlight this work and partner with the right entities within your community are incredibly helpful. So you have organizations like the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which is NMSDC. And I know, Dr. White, you're a member of the NMSDC certified vendor.
Certified, yes.
And also with WeBank, our Women's Business Entrepreneurial National Council as well, is incredibly important to be members of these organizations who are leading the effort across the country, because they have chapters in a lot of major cities that help connect and help build capacity and education, and working with small businesses, women-owned, minority-owned, to help them grow and lead their business and connect them with corporations. So that's a big, big trigger. So having these partnerships with these organizations to help you make these connections, find the right vendors for the spaces you need them in, is incredibly important. And financially, when you're working with your local vendors, you're really helping the organization save money by utilizing a closer space, a closer niche of folks to be a part of your organization, and also helping your community grow economically as well, by this organization now being able to flourish with these connections. So it's so important.
It's so important. And yes, NWC is really proud to be, as a woman-owned business, certified through WeBank and certified through NMSDC. And so we reference NMSDC. I want to make sure for those in this community who may not be familiar that they can have the opportunity to learn more. So National Minority Supplier Development Council, if we could get someone in the team to please share that resource into the chat. I'm also proud to say that here in my market, I'm physically located in the upstate of South Carolina. So we are part of CVMSDC, Carolinas, Virginia Minority Supplier Development Council. And again, they work very diligently to help support the needs from a business development perspective of the minority businesses, as well as they have a corporation side where they're really helping those corporations to get much more engaged in, again, recognizing the need to be much more intentional and innovative in their approach to increasing diverse supplier spend. So great resources. So I'm seeing into the, again, we're live on LinkedIn. And so we also have some comments that will come forth through our LinkedIn community that are joining us. And so I want to acknowledge one of the comments that's been raised and go ahead and bring that to the conversation, Lisette. So she's saying, are we working to rename this contractor strategy? Minority is not a word we're trying to use and raise up these days within DEI work. So I want to just kind of share my high level thoughts. I'm also curious to hear yours as well. I agree that it is not the best word, especially for those of us who are practitioners in this space, because this certainly can send a message that minority is inferior, less than, and that's certainly not it. I think that the reason it continues to find its way in our vocabulary and in our language as we're talking about economic inclusion, supplier diversity, is because it is how universally most people understand it. I think about, like, in our market where I leverage the Minority Business Accelerator program, it is because how in which we define minority is very much closely connected to how in which, the local government kind of defines minorities for all of the programs that are associated with it. But the nomenclature is quite varies. Sometimes people say diverse supplier. I also believe this. I think that just as we are trying to recruit for diverse talent within organizations, specificity is really important. So in our market, when we really launched, 10 years ago, the Minority Business Accelerator Program, what we found was that minority businesses, specifically ethnic minority owned businesses, they were the most disproportionate. We saw that over decades, they were employing 2.5 individuals, and that number was remaining the same. What that said to us is that those businesses were not growing. They were not really able to compete effectively to be able to create jobs. And so for us, when we started the launch, it was all about focusing on the most marginalized business community, and that was the Black and Brown community. And so we have to be very specific about it. I want to get you in the conversation, Lisette, to just share your thoughts. Is that nomenclature that you all have thought very intently about at Jefferson? And how do you navigate these types of conversations?
Yeah, thank you. The word minority, I think it hits a lot of buttons for a lot of people, but, I think you really hit the nail on the head. Dr. White is saying the nomenclature is there for a reason. I think, the word minority, it does touch a lot of hot buttons. And we've also used the word diverse suppliers as well, and women suppliers, and small businesses. And we're trying to use all those other words. But at the end of the day, when we are looking at Black and Brown organizations, even after all of these years and decades of the work in supplier diversity, it's still a challenge. And we need to recognize that we do need to work with our Black and Brown organizations and identify them and really hit our goals strong enough to help us really increase the work and increase the percentage of business that we are doing with our Black and Brown organizations. So, I try to say, listen, there are a lot of words and things that might hit our buttons. Sometimes they're uncomfortable to us to hear certain things. When we want to stress or make a change in our organization to make a decision on not using a word, that's great. I think that's phenomenal. I want to emphasize what we are doing to make a real impact in the work to create policy on building and increasing that work connections and partnerships and percentage of business that we're doing with our Black, Brown, veteran-owned, disabled, LGBTQ, small business. I want us to really get our efforts on what's the impact that we are making as leaders to make a change in the organization, and what is the impact that will make the change to help us grow our business and really increase economic inclusion and make a difference in our communities.
I love that. And let's go right there, because you're speaking our language. At NWC, we talk a lot about activity versus impact. Activity is a start and an end date. Impact is where we look at systems, policies, procedures, culture. We create that shift that can be sustained when you think about it from an impact perspective and not just kind of a moment or activity in time. So let's talk about that. For those who are joined here to get together today, and maybe they aren't quite as familiar with all the best practices to establishing and maintaining a very robust supplier diversity initiative that leads towards impact, what can you share? What can organizations do to make supplier diversity a norm and to really create, again, the outcomes that we ultimately are driving for?
Okay, so I'm excited. This is my favorite question, because this is where really we need to dive in and to really pay attention to strategy and being able to strategically create a way where supplier diversity is part of the fabric of the organization at an operational level. Because Dr. White talked earlier about, access and talent and how HR and how that is foundational. Well, supplier diversity is also foundational. You have an organization with many departments, and in smaller companies too, you have many departments that have the capability to spend. You have a budget, and you have a leader that makes those decisions to spend that money every year. It's not just senior leadership saying what you're going to spend. They're giving you money, and you as a leader in your department are making the decision on how you're spending that money. Well, that's where you come in operationally. And so getting the entire organization involved in these decisions is important. And it does start from the top. We need the leadership of your organization, your CEO, to be committed. And for me, and my best practice is having the conversation, being prepared to have that conversation with your CEO, understanding that there may be some learning opportunities, but when your CEO understands it, making sure that it is part of the larger language that is communicated to your organization by that CEO. And making sure that statement is made aware and is really mentioned at all levels. When you're thinking about leadership meetings, when you're designing your policy, that policy needs to be created from the CEO and your cabinet level and approved by your board. Making sure that that policy is driven to make sure that you are really looking to increase that percentage of diverse suppliers within your organization. And what does that look like?
Yeah.
From there, for us, what was important for me was to create a sustainable way to continue to make this happen. And that was to create a leadership council on supplier diversity that brings in all of those decision makers, those budget decision makers, into a committee that we meet once every quarter to understand what opportunities are coming, how we can connect our leaders to these partnerships that we mentioned before, our chapters for NMSDC, our chapters for WeBank, our chapters with the NGLC, veterans, all of those, to make sure that they have the appropriate resources in order to vet the vendors they need when they're looking for contracts and looking for suppliers to supply goods and services for their departments. And not only that, but this council that we have put together, they're also responsible for actually establishing a goal for the institution on how we are going to now increase percentage-wise on an annual basis to make sure that we are sustaining this work and these efforts. And this group has to be chaired, and the executive sponsors have to be those leaders of supply chain. It's not going to be me. This work has to be done by the group that's creating these contracts, and it's presented to the cabinet for accountability measures to be included in an incentivized way. And I want to specify this because I think we've talked. I've talked, if people have heard me say this before, people use the term "what gets measured gets done." Folks, that's not true. There are a lot of measures. And all of you have probably seen a lot of measures, but if they're not tied to your performance management or incentives for your growth in an organization, guess what? They're not going to do them. We have a lot of work to do. I know for me, I'm busy all the time. You know what I pay attention to? My core objectives that I'm being graded on. And that's important for everyone to know. We are human beings. And the reality is there are tons of measures, and we have to make an intentional effort to make sure that if supplier diversity is important to your organization, that it's tied to your incentives. How is that accountable to our leadership team to make sure that we're paying attention to it and being responsible for the growth of our own community? So that's incredibly important. So I know I'm dabbling and talking too much because I'm passionate about this too, but do I want to stop and get some more questions, or can I keep going? Or
Well, let me just interject for a second to allow you to catch your breath for a moment. This is so good. This is so good that I think that it requires kind of pausing, really digesting, taking it in. And I love the reframe of what gets measured gets done. It's what gets measured gets done once the person is held accountable, right? And that can be through incentives. That can be through, again, those key performance indicators where there are consequences if you're not meeting the mark. That's what we failed to realize. That accountability piece is significant. So I love the idea of this leadership council that is strategically placed to help make sure the outcome that we're seeking gets really established. I think that's great. I want to let you continue on, but something else that I want to make sure I'm bringing to the conversation is, we're talking about at the organizational level, and that's, of course, typically where that supplier diversity mindset and strategies, occur. But I also don't want people to sit back if they're not a buyer or a purchasing director or a supplier diversity director to feel like I have no say in this, I have no influence. We each are consumers of so many goods and services. We know people. How are we being intentional to bring those recommendations into those that within our organizations that are a part of making those buying decisions? I think there's so much that can be done at the individual consumer level as well to help us with this broader goal of economic inclusion. So anyway, but yes, continue on, Lisette.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive into what you just said, because I think, when you're not part of the decision making, how can you be a part of, helping the organization grow? And it's really your voice. When you are a part of an organization, you have a boss that makes decisions on budgets and say, hey, listen, I heard we're going to, purchase this. I have a vendor that is certified as minority or women owned or as a veteran owned business and would love for them to be considered. Or talk to, your supply chain folks. Or if there's a chief diversity officer, connect with your chief diversity officer. Anytime you have something that will benefit the growth of your economy and connecting our Black and Brown organizations and our women-owned organizations and bring them to have opportunities for growth for your institution, speak up and let us know, because a lot of times there may be an organization that we didn't know about. And another thing, if they're not certified, we can get them connected to the right people to get them certified, and maybe even help them, with a small scholarship to help them become certified. So there are lots of opportunities for that as well. So I wanted to just address that. Use your voice, really speak out, and connect with those folks, and really have your voice heard in your organization, because that really helps.
Yes.
And so I will talk about another program that we are very passionate about at Jefferson. It's been very important to me. I've seen this work done in other areas, and I wanted to bring to life an opportunity to bring our local vendors to the light. Because one of the biggest concerns in supplier diversity is that our smaller vendors sometimes don't know how to connect with larger organizations, or even sometimes smaller organizations. They don't know who the person is to say, hey, I'm here, I have this good, I have this service, I have this opportunity that I can partner with you and maybe save you some money, or I do really good work, whatever it is. They don't know sometimes who to go to. So we have opened up and integrated a program called Supply Chain Connect. And Supply Chain Connect is focused on our local community, our minority-owned, women-owned businesses, to get them in front of the buyer, of who's making the decision for that particular contract, to pitch their organization. So it's kind of like Shark Tank, but not so much. But every other Tuesday, we bring in an MWBE, which is a minority women business entrepreneur, in front of a contract that is getting ready to open, and have them present directly to the person who will be making decisions. And this is important because sometimes our businesses don't know who these folks are. And so it's an opportunity for us to say, we have the opportunity for you to present in front of us. And what our community appreciates a lot about this is they're getting a direct person. And I want to make this point. A lot of vendors get responses from organizations to tell them to go to a database on their website and say, put your name into the database and we'll get back to you. Well, guess what? Nobody ever gets back to the vendor. And it's so disheartening, and our vendors lose trust with our organizations because of this. And so I don't want to tell somebody to go to a database. I want somebody to sign up for Supply Chain Connect, and we get them in front of a vendor when we have the contract open for them to present what they can offer for our organization in person. So it's important for us to understand the challenges that small businesses do have, because you have organizations that try to just send someone to a black hole, say, put your name in this database, and then they're sitting there waiting and never hear anything. And that could be detrimental to the loyalty and the connection that you have with your community.
Supply chain connect. I love that approach. I love that idea. And again, we have to be very creative, strategic, and innovative in how in which we're trying to solve for the inequities that exist right now around opportunities that really can help propel minority-owned businesses to the next level. So that's where a lot of, like, when we talk about NMSDC, CVMSDC, I know that they're really big on those matchmaking experiences. We want to connect those business leaders directly with someone who can give them the most accurate information, who are holding the decisions. And I think that's critical. Sometimes people just don't know how to do business with certain corporations. So if there's not a willingness to help educate, then we're going to continue to see that divide and opportunities to be missed. I love the fact that you mentioned the practice of many organizations to send people to a database. That happens all the time. And I realize that that can be a really efficient way of trying to capture a directory that then you kind of sift through. But you're right, it does feel like they're just going down this rabbit hole and it's not really producing any results. It's nothing like being able to have a real connection point. So thank you for bringing that to the conversation. So I have so many more questions, but I want to shift now because I don't want to be selfish. I want to make sure that this community has an opportunity to address any questions that may be coming up for you, any curiosities you're holding, or perhaps it's something you want to contribute that you think would also be of value to this topic. You can share your questions simply by placing it in the chat. If you don't desire to be spotlighted and to unmute yourself and present live, we'll certainly pay attention to that. Although we do love to see smiling faces. And if you are willing to be placed into the spotlight, then raise your hand. That lets me know that I can pull you into this conversation. So while maybe folks are thinking about questions and comments, I want to go to one more, and then hopefully we'll have some takers that are willing to leverage your great insight, Lisette, that you are providing to us. Now, so how do you mentioned boards in the beginning when you were talking about those stakeholders who can help really facilitate accountability around these outcomes we're seeking. So how do you work with board members to help create goals related to incentives that can help yield, again, greater supplier diverse spend?
Yeah, great question. That it's a tactic that takes a little bit of time, and you have to be incredibly prepared to present to a board to help the board have an incredible amount of understanding of why this is important for your organization to be connected with the community and just supplier diversity as a whole. What is that business case? You have to be clear on what that means for your organization and understand how you're going to draft and really create a model of how you're going to create a goal for your organization as well, so that the board can see and understand what that means. And when you're working with boards to create accountability, you also have to have an understanding of how incentives are created within your corporation. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different goals that are put in place that are incentivized. There can't be a million of them. There can only be a very few, very handful of numbers, because there's a lot of money involved in how they actually incentivize goals that go to the organization. So when you're thinking about how you're going to form how this plays out, you have to be very creative as to how it will be included into an enterprise-wide goal. So a lot of times you have maybe 5 goals, which obviously you're looking at a people goal, a financial goal. You're looking at it in healthcare. You're looking at patients, experience and safety and those things that you have to consider. And how does this particular goal fit in? And so that's important for you to be able to be creative in how you do that. And so sometimes being sure that can be a part of maybe a procurement goal that is part of that incentivized way. It's important to partner with your committee which is important to help create that goal. Supply chain, it's important to have them involved as well. And as your advocates, those that have budgetary responsibility, it's important to understand where their budgets look like as well. Coming from a goal that's enterprise, that's an incentivized goal, is one thing. Then how do you carve that out within the organization and present that to the board for them to understand? So having your committee in place to help you understand what that looks like is important, because you have departments within your organization like human resources, finance, legal, marketing, patient experience, all of these things that make up your organization, and they have budgetary responsibilities. Understanding what they have open in order for to account for contracts for the next year is important to then be able to set goals. So you can then dictate, if HR says, well, we have 10% that's going to be open for next year for this particular contract, we want to say, okay, so we want to take that 10%, and I want you to say 30% of that will be given to minority vendors. And so you want to be able to carve out from all the opportunities and budgets that are in the departments to be specifically geared towards supplier diversity spend. And so that's a creative way that you can formulate that leads to a larger enterprise goal, and being able to craft that in a way that spells out and connects to the business case. That's what the boards will want to see. They're looking for data. They're looking for what that metric is, and how are we being held accountable for it is important. And can we actually meet that goal is another thing, is the realistic goal.
Yeah, get your board involved. I mean, absolutely get your board involved. A lot of these boards they're governing bodies, and we know that when things are of importance to the board, it gets trickled down throughout the entire system. And so, but the way to do that is with data, is with clarity in your communications, and then let that communication strategy also trickle down to all stakeholders throughout the organization, so that they are also aware of the goal, of the why behind the goal, and they can help support it. I'm not seeing any hands raised so far, but there is a question I'm going to get to in the chat in just a moment. But I do want to get you, Lisette, to talk about the value of mentor, protege type programs and initiatives. We hear often that part of like the supplier diversity world, there's a lot of tier 1, tier 2 type situations, right? So can you bring a little bit of clarity to what that entails exactly and what the value is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start out with tier 1, tier 2. Tier 1 opportunities are direct contracts that you have with vendors outside that you actually pay an invoice directly to. That would be considered a tier 1 vendor. A tier 2 vendor is really a vendor that you're holding them accountable for minority spend. And whatever language you use to make that happen is going to be different for every corporation, but you can say, 30% of whatever you do with us has to be with minority spend. And that's just holding that company accountable. So you're not paying anybody directly, you're paying a majority company, but you're holding them accountable to then report back to you how much spend they're doing with the work that they have promised with you. So that's the difference within that particular category. And I'm sorry, I got, what was the first part again? I apologize.
It really was just about understanding tier 1 and tier 2 and kind of mentor protege,
mentor protege.
Sometimes how partnering sometimes can help get people in the door at entry point, right?
Absolutely. I think that part about mentoring is so incredibly important, especially with small businesses within your organization, within your community and your organization. And the industry that you're in can dictate that as well. So I'm in healthcare. So any kind of work that is done in a hospital setting where there are patients, vendors need to know how to work around that and keep the environment still safe. And if they're delivering or if they're doing construction or whatever it is they're doing within your entity. And so sometimes if you have a new vendor that doesn't have that experience, it's important to partner them with the majority contract holder and have them be shadowed and give them a smaller portion. That's one thing I want to share with all of you, because there's so much to talk about with this particular topic, but contracts that are held by organizations, a lot of times people think they all have to be 100% or nothing. And that's not
Yeah,
true. You can have a
right.
contract for, say, for example, snow removal, right? And that contract, you probably have given it to ABC company 100%, but you don't have to. You can give ABC 75%, and 25% of that contract can go to, Miss Martinez snow removal, and partner them to help that smaller organization grow. And that's important for all of you to know, that you can be creative with contracts and help smaller organizations take smaller chunks and be able to grow their business so that one day they could fulfill a 100% contract. So being creative in that way, you can split it up into halves or however you want, but to help an organization get better and grow and understand how to work in your business, it's important to partner them with larger organizations, have them mentor them, have them understand how to do the business, and also provide them a little smaller portion of a contract.
Absolutely. Do not demise small beginnings. It is an entry point, and then growth is certainly, should be on the horizon. But that can be a game changer when we think about the fact that a lot of small minority businesses may not even have the capacity to take on a contract that's at that, $70 million contract. But what they could do is maybe one that's much less than that, that's right in their wheelhouse. And so I think that also being mindful to make sure that we're setting up our minority owned businesses, diverse suppliers, to be successful is important as well. Sometimes I realize that a lot of minority businesses, because they're so just hungry for the work and the opportunity, they may say yes and not really fully be equipped at that time with the capacity to take that on. And then that creates, additional challenges. And so I love that we can amplify the importance of really evaluating, all of those ways in which we can help provide a piece of the pie, if you will, to these diverse suppliers. So there is a question that's popped up into the chat that I want to bring in while we have just a few minutes left. And this is actually from Lisa Ong. And Lisa, as I mentioned at the start of the hour, she's going to be an upcoming guest co-host for IC VodCast. And she says, how can we strategically amplify and capture our impact as magnificent, wonderful, and differentiated specialty suppliers and share trusted referrals with influential decision makers? What would you say to that, Lisette?
It's about those networking opportunities and relationships, right? And how we get into the door and be able to share what it is we're doing. That's the important biggest piece, is that relationship piece. How do we get in the door and to know that? I know for us, it's through Supply Chain Connect. We've opened the door. We have those people available to kind of hear from our vendors, to understand what they're doing, and also to understand where their place in the market is for us, and vet them and get them prepared. It's really researching, being part and a member of NMSDC or WeBank and participating in the minority networks that they have, or women networks that they have, is also a way to kind of amplify your voice and what you are doing within your business. There's such a following for both NMSDC and WeBank, and I know Dr. White, you can speak to that. But once you begin to know other organizations and get to know their connections and get those names, you can start building those relationships. But participating in the matchmaker sessions, participating in the conferences, getting to know who these leaders are that you want to work for, find out who they are. A lot of times, you can find names on their websites. Their emails may not be on there, but try different forms of getting the email so you can actually get your voice out there and get connected with the businesses. But I think a lot of organizations are looking and understand supplier diversity and being more mindful, and I'm seeing a change. And I know for us, we're trying to help people learn how to be more creative and building those relationships. So just speaking your voice and getting out there is important.
Yes, network, network, network. And we have to keep in mind, sometimes I know that just the phenomenon of networking can be really intimidating for people. But when you consider that a lot of those procurement leaders, purchasers, those are in the position of supplier diversity, most of them have diverse supplier spend goals. And so it helps them to also build up their knowledge of all of those diverse suppliers. And so don't be afraid to make those connections and really cultivate those relationships. So we're almost at the top of the hour. I want to thank you so very much, Lisette, for being here today. I feel like the conversation could have continued for at least another hour. We'll have to consider that and maybe invite you back. But I want to give you the last 60 seconds to share with us anything that's coming up for you that perhaps you did not get a chance to socialize in this hour of time. So you have the last word. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been phenomenal to be able to share it. And as you know, Dr. White said, we could talk about this for hours. It's such a great topic. Listen, we have a supply chain connect program at Jefferson. It's right on our website. Please connect with us. We are building up our schedule. I think we're booked up to the end of the year, but we want to make sure that we get folks in line to present to our folks and really really increase our spend, but also help the economic inclusion with our community. So please connect with us in Supply Chain Connect as well. Next week, we have our very first inaugural Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit. We have a lot of great speakers. We have that up posted on diversity.jefferson.edu, so folks can participate as well. And, listen, I want to make a plug for NMSDC and WeBank again. For those who don't have a program, they can help you as well. If you are in a health system, I don't know what all industries are here. Health systems partner with what we call a GPO, which is a group purchasing organization. A lot of times, and I don't know, there is somebody on the call named Deborah Williams, which, if that's the right Deborah Williams, works for Premier, and that's a GPO. These organizations, healthcare organizations, work with GPOs specifically for contracts. So that's another avenue. And they have great supplier diversity programs. And if it's the right Deborah Williams, she's the director of supplier diversity and manages their whole initiative for that GPO. GPOs, you can Google them. There are several of them, like Premier, there's Vizient, and they actually manage the purchasing portfolios for health industry, for hospital systems. So we can, if you are a member of WeBank, NMSDC, a GPO is another avenue for healthcare to be a part of in order to get recognized and be put into RFPs for opportunities in the future as well. So I just wanted to share, making sure folks understand that the GPO piece is another part for healthcare.
So many great resources, and I'm seeing a lot of it find its way into the chat. We will also make sure that we share out some of the resources that have been communicated during this podcast when we send the replay to all of those who registered. Lisette, thank you so much again. We look forward to having you back. I'm seeing in the chat, yes, please have her back. Please have her back. So we will definitely be in touch about that. Have a safe and wonderful, restful weekend, and we look forward to seeing you all back here again next Friday. If you've enjoyed this, share it out with someone in your network. Thanks, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.